Welcome to Russian Influence. Elina Reddy is reporting from Ian Porter Center. Today we have a perfect example of how Russian culture has had an influence on Australia. We will be interviewing Alan Cook, the conductor of Melbourne Chamber Choir and Modern Opera. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born here in Melbourne, Australia. My family have been here for 200 years or more. I started studying music when I was a child. At about 8 years old, I started organ and piano. And went through my teenage rebellious years when I played rock music and then went back to classical music later
So that's quite a contrast.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And so, yeah, over the years I've done studies and work in Europe and Italy, Spain and other countries, and came back to Australia. I was away in Europe for 10 years. I came back to Australia 5 years ago.
So you're Australian born,
yep,
to Australian parents. Mm-hmm. Please explain your connection to Russia and its influence that it has on your love for music.
Yeah. Well, some of that was a little bit of an accident. Originally when I was studying here, there was my first conducting teacher was a Russian conductor, Vladimir Weiss. And he's now passed away, but he taught me my my first lessons in conducting here at this conservatorium. And then I went to Italy to further my studies and studied there with Italian teachers. But it was quite by accident that when I was in Italy, I was conducting an Italian opera at an Italian summer festival. And they brought in an orchestra from Russia to play for these concerts. And so I met many of the members of this orchestra, and we worked very well together, and they said, well, you must come to Russia and do a concert with us. So they invited me to go there, and and from that point then, my involvement with Russia started to snowball. There were other orchestras invited me as well, and I did. Over the last 13 years, I have very regularly visited Russia. So I never actually lived there for any particularly long period. I was always going in and out all the time, but typically 2 or 3 times a year I've been in Russia. So after my first experience there of being unable to read or speak anything at all, I found it very difficult even to get food in a restaurant because I couldn't read the menu. And
it's very different cuisine as well.
Well, it's different cuisine and different alphabet.
A little bit.
And so I was determined after that I need to at least be able to read Cyrillic. So I started on that path to learn to read Cyrillic so I could read.
So how old were you at the time?
Oh, goodness. This was already nearly 15 years ago. So, yeah, I was in my mid-30s at that point, early 30s, yeah.
Yep.
Then started to learn to speak Russian because I was going back regularly. So I bought some books of Russian grammar and began to do exercises myself at home and practice with real Russian people. And so little by little, my ability to speak Russian developed. And, of course, visiting and doing concerts in Russia regularly, I had the opportunity to see a lot of Russian opera and to conduct many concerts of Russian music. And so over that time I developed something of an expertise for Russian music, which in the West is not very common, especially in Australia. And then in addition to that, I developed a lot of experience with Russian composers, and so I started to become known for that here when I came back to Australia. So now I'm at this conservatorium again. I'm doing a PhD at the moment in about the operas of Rimski-Korsakov, and working very hard to develop and, I suppose, raise the profile of Russian opera here in particular.
Rimski-Korsakov, this composer, is known for fairy tales. So Why is the passion for Rimski-Korsakov?
Because of all of the Russian composers of opera in particular, he was the most prolific. He wrote 15 operas. He was, so I have a lot of respect for his work ethic and his, compared to other composers like Mussorgsky and Borodin, who were much more chaotic. They were very talented, but a little crazy. But Rimski-Korsakov was a very, very sensible, well-organized artist, which is a rare thing. And I was very much attracted to his music as well. I love his music, and his operas. There are many fairy tale operas. He also has some others, some more sort of what they call verismo operas as well, like Tsarskaya Nevesta and the Tsar's Bride and so forth. So he has an enormous range of work as well. He didn't just stick to one genre or one particular thing.
So you like his versatility as well in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And he's particularly well known even in the West for his ability to orchestrate, so to use the instruments in the orchestra in combinations and in ways that are very distinct and incredibly beautiful.
Fascinating. If you had to choose 3 gifts that Russia has given to the world, what would they be?
Well, first I'd have to say their music, of course, Russian music. I think, even in the West, everybody so very well knows and loves Tchaikovsky, Rimski-Korsakov, and Mussorgsky in particular. Also Shostakovich is very, very well loved in the West, and Prokofiev too. So I'd have to say Russian music is probably the first gift, and connected with that is certainly the Russian ballet is very, very highly respected and loved around the world.
Would the third one be vodka by any chance?
No. No, I wouldn't say. I try to avoid the stereotypes. Okay. I'd be more inclined to say borscht. But
good choice. I like that.
I'd much prefer a hot bowl of borscht than a bottle of vodka, honestly.
You lived and worked in Russia and also in Australia. What do you think, how different the life is between the two?
Well, the life of a musician is fairly difficult anywhere in the world. Freelance musicians in particular suffer everywhere. They're typically not very well paid and don't have the greatest working conditions, because most of what they do is just out of passion. So they're prepared to work many more hours than they're paid for, and they're prepared to do many things that most people wouldn't do unless they were being paid by the hour for it. But that being said, in Russia, certainly the conditions that orchestral musicians in particular and opera singers have in Russia are certainly a bit more difficult. The lifestyle is the standard of living is not as high there. But in general, I found that they're all quite happy to live reasonably well anyway. I mean, they seem to be a very happy group of people typically, and I've always enjoyed working with them.
Ellen, you took over Melbourne Chamber Choir and Modern Opera from David Cran. How do your styles differ, and what influences have you kept from David?
Well, David was originally my teacher when I was at Conservatorium 20 years ago.
So you're his successor.
So he was a mentor to me, and I have a great deal of respect for him. At the same time, when he was just speaking about More Than Opera, when he was running More Than Opera, his focus was a lot more on trying to raise some awareness of opera amongst people who typically would not experience it. So he did quite a few. He was also a composer, so he wrote quite a few children's operas, and he liked to take performances into schools and things like that in order to expose particularly the younger generation to the genre of opera. Whereas I suppose that's not quite so much my passion. More Than Opera is still doing things in order to raise awareness of opera amongst communities and groups that don't have as much experience with it. But my focus is on some other areas. For example, this year where there's a new opera being composed by a female Australian composer, and we're going to put that on the stage. We're
That's
producing
exciting.
that for her. So yeah, I'm focusing the company a bit more on that kind of thing now to bring new operas to the stage rather than just performing the ones by the old dead white men, as they say. So our style differs in that sense. And with the Melbourne Chamber Choir, our styles are very similar. We both had similar goals, although David's choice of repertoire with the Melbourne Chamber Choir was much broader. He liked to choose everything from sort of, medieval music right through to classical, right into some contemporary music sometimes as well, whereas I think for me I've narrowed the focus a little bit, and I prefer the choir to focus on a particular type of repertoire and do that really well rather than try and spread ourselves too thin. Yeah.
I know that your Russian is really good, so could you please say a couple of sentences in Russian to me?
Что могу сказать? Это всегда сложно, когда человек говорит: пожалуйста, говори что-то на русском.
Не знаю, что сказать.
Да, я не знаю, что сказать. Первые слова, которые придут ко мне, это я не знаю, что сказать.
Well, your Russian is excellent,
Thank you.
I detect hardly any accent at all. And when we watch movies and they have some supposedly Russian people who are supposed to speak Russian, you can instantly tell when the Russian is not really good. So my question to you is, because of the phonetics of Russian are so complex, I know that you conduct master classes, so how do you teach your singers to sing in Russian language?
Yeah, well, that's a particular skill that all young singers have to learn from the beginning. When they start learning classical singing, from the very beginning, they're singing in languages that they don't understand. So at conservatorium, they typically learn Italian, French, and German. Unfortunately, they don't do any Russian, but I'm trying to change that. But so it's a process. Usually by the time they are interested in doing some Russian, they've already done some French and Italian and German. So they've already understand the process of, and they're already, I suppose, their mind is already prepared to deal with strange sounds and sounds that are not familiar to English speakers. And typically I find Russian, for most singers, Russian is less difficult than in pronunciation than French, for example. French and even, especially for English speakers, Italian can be very difficult because Italian has some very, very distinct and hard consonants that we don't have. So I find Russian not too difficult. There are a couple of...
But you are married to a Russian woman.
Yes.
So that helps a little bit.
Well, being married to a Russian woman has helped in my fluency, definitely. But I spoke Russian before I met her.
Yes.
That's how I met her.
Yes. And you met her in Barcelona?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
How did that happen?
Well, she was just in a cafe with her son, and I heard her speaking Russian to her son, and I thought, well, I need practice. So, I introduced myself.
What a wonderful fairy tale story, just like the operas in Rimski-Korsakov.
But it was a little ironic that after visiting Russia so many times, I found my Russian wife in Barcelona.
It was meant to be. A really exciting concert is coming up, well, two concerts in Australia coming up in Melbourne Town Hall on the 10th of March, where Voices of St. Petersburg, some amazing opera singers from Mariinsky Theatre are coming to perform in Melbourne, and in Sydney on the 14th of March. Yeah. And you will be conducting.
Yeah, that's right.
So please tell us a little bit about the repertoire.
Yeah, so it's, as I've said, because Russian opera is my principal passion in music. I really wanted to be able to bring some of this repertoire to Australia and have it sung by authentic Russian singers and preferably the best that there are. In order for Australians to just hear how wonderful this repertoire is, because there is a quite a large audience for opera in Australia, but typically the opera companies in Australia make very safe decisions about repertoire, so they choose a lot of popular Italian operas or German operas that they know are going to attract audiences. So unfortunately that means that Russian opera is not very often performed here, and if they do a Russian opera, it's usually Evgeny Onegin, Tchaikovsky, or occasionally someone else, but they rarely do any of the Russian composers such as Rimski-Korsakov, Borodin, or Mussorgsky in particular. They don't do. So the repertoire that I've chosen are mostly arias and duets from the operas of 5 composers. We have Borodin, Prince Igor, Rimski-Korsakov. We're doing some works from Snegurочка and Sadko and Tsarskaya Nevesta. Also, we have Prokofiev, a bit of Prokofiev, some Tchaikovsky. We will be doing some of the most famous arias from Evgeny Onegin, because the audience always love those.
This is phenomenal selection.
Yeah, it will be a wonderful concert, yeah.
This is the man behind the scenes, Alex Marchinovsky. Welcome to Russian Influence.
Thank you.
It's amazing that you are bringing Russian gems to Australia. So please tell us a little bit about the process.
Well, I'm Russian born, and since my childhood I was influenced by Russian music. Of course, my father still playing, self-taught, playing on domra, and he wanted me to...
That's a wonderful instrument.
Yes, Russian folk
Yeah.
instrument, and yeah, I went through musical school, but my passion was, since I've been a teenager, has been always been heavy metal. But I really listen to any quality music which is from classical music up to whatever, you know, I enjoy.
So you're a music appreciator.
That's right. I don't stick to one genre. And that's how I met Alan, because my friends play in heavy metal band, and I wanted them to play with symphony orchestra. And
Wow,
Alan said, "Look, what do you think about this project?" And I just fired up straight away. I didn't even think much about it. I said, "Yep, let's do that." And that's how it happened. I went to Russia to meet the singers. I actually ran a little interview with them, and even went to one of their performances, Magic Fluid by Mozart. I went to Mariinsky Theatre to see that.
It's an incredible venue.
It's amazing. It was amazing. I just loved it. So that's how I got into it, even though I'm behind the scene.
Well, we have talked about the very much anticipated event of Voices of St. Petersburg. Please tell us what happens the next day after the event.
Next day we will be holding a formal reception where our guests can meet the 4 singers that are coming from Mariinsky Theatre, and just dine with them, talk to them, and maybe talk them into singing something. I don't know, but
depending what mood they'll be in.
How much vodka would be?
We'll be drunk.
Yeah, consumed. But yeah, it's gonna be a great night at Rada restaurant in Ormond.
Well, I personally love the food at Rada restaurant, and I am very much looking forward.
You're invited.
Thank you. I will definitely be there, and I'm looking forward to the concert at Melbourne Town Hall, and I cannot wait to meet the performers the next day.
colleghi. Pose. Vado. E cacciata da Antonio.
Hello, Australia.
All the best wishes and see you soon.